Welcome to Let's Talk America. We're back with the Let's Save America Marathon, which has been ongoing for the last, what is it now? It's going on a week and a half. And we will continue it right up until the Friday just before the Tuesday election, on which we're having people in. We're talking about all the different aspects of what's going to affect the electoral outcome. We're actually consulting with people as well about how they feel about what that likely outcome is going to be. We, of course, welcome, since we're live, we welcome your comments on Facebook or YouTube where you're seeing us. And we would be glad to have you join in. Got a couple of really good comments in the course of the segments we've had so far, which always help to give the wheel a whack. And my very special guest today, Steve Hotze, is going to be telling us about something that we're hearing about repeatedly as we get closer to the election, because I think it comes more into focus as one of those things that could prove to be critically important to the ability of the forces that are trying to, in effect, overthrow our country, as to whether or not they will have an opportunity to seize upon, to create the kind of chaos that might allow them to do it. And one of those things that Stephen Hotze has been very much involved in, and now you know that he has a medical background and so forth, but he's also been heavily active in politics with a spirit of deeply committed citizenship since he and I were both, what do we call ourselves, though? We call in those days youngsters, teenagers, whatever, because I think we were both around 17 years old or thereabouts when we first met and had a chance to work together. And you're still at it, Steve, in the midst of a time that's as challenging, complicated. Did you have any idea that before we were saying hello to the Lord again, we would see America in the kind of condition it's in right now?
It is shocking to me, but as I reflect back on those people that have been warning us about the Marxist and communist infiltration into our schools, into our government, it's not surprising now as I look back and said, well, of course, remember everybody said, well, but John Birchers are a bunch of right-wingers. They're totally crazy about these communists taking over. And they said, they laid out exactly, Nikita Khrushchev laid out what he was going to do. Demoralize, destabilize us, create crisis, and ultimately they promise if we just give the communists or Marxists power, they normalize things, and that's what they're promising now. You want to get rid of all the rioting and thugging and beating and burning? Elect us. We'll put an end to it all. So it's shocking that we're here. Really, if you'd told me 8 months ago we've been in this position, or 10 months ago, or 11, I would never have believed it. But we are, and everybody has to take a stand where they're all true patriots. Remember this old saying? We used to say, somebody say something for the mic. It's time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. Well, we've said that jokingly. How many times have you said, somebody, give me a mic? We've said that. Well, it is time for all good men and women to come to the aid of their country. Patrick Henry said it best. As for me, give me liberty or give me death. I don't know what other men are going to choose. Forbid it, Almighty God, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And true freedom comes from God. You've talked about this on your shows in the past. Without God, there's no freedom. There's slavery because anything goes. There's no moral standards or no values. Love doesn't mean anything. Caring, concern, kindness, none of that. It lacks meaning. All that matters when there's no God is, do I have the power to do what I want to do? And when that happens, those people that are the most devious and evil will take power, and they will destroy those of us that have values and believe in God. The atheistic communist revolution is about destroying moral values by destroying God. Taking him out of schools, taking him out of, even out of the pledge. They want to take him out of the pledge. And so we are one nation under God. Our founding fathers understand the biblical worldview, and we were founded upon fundamental biblical principles. And that's what our nation was founded on, and they're trying to destroy that. So let me share with you.
Well, before you start, though, to kind of give people a sense of back, because a lot of people have been susceptible, I fear, to the fact that over the years, and I've had this, in politics, out of politics, there was always an effort that both parties pursued to try to convince people that there wasn't much cheating doesn't happen, and so forth. No, I've got to tell you, when I got actually involved and was on the receiving end of some pretty significant cheating, I realized that that's nonsense, that cheating is going on all the time, and that it's stock in trade for both parties, I imagine, because I didn't have any experience of it very much, except from my fellow Republicans. They all are doing junk that they shouldn't be doing, and they know darn well they shouldn't. But here's the problem. People are nonetheless unhappy to admit it, incredulous about it, and that's because when you're dealing with these people, you have to have a certain amount of confidence that you can trust them and that the people you're electing aren't going to make themselves party to destroying the integrity of the elections. And if they do, it'll be like one of those moments when somebody's telling you something bad and you just don't want to hear it. You just don't want it to be part of your life and expectation. The reason I paused for a minute before we went on to the immediate topic, though, is that I think that what's coming at us now is the clear proof. Whatever my convictions may have been on how all of this is distributed between the two parties, the Democrats seem determined in their behavior, in the platform they're standing on, and so forth and so on. They seem absolutely determined to prove that they are among the most deceitful people who have ever appeared on the scene in American politics. Because everything about them, from Joe Biden's Catholicism to Kamala Harris's great concern and love and humanitarianism toward the black community, whose inhabitants she couldn't wait to put in jail long enough to even scrutinize properly their guilt or innocence. I mean, and people know this. So we're dealing with people who seem to be now fulfilling the promise that is made in that Marxist-Leninist communist ideology, that you get to power by any means, and the only difference between truth and falsehood is, does it help the party to succeed to victory? I think this memory may help people to understand that this isn't just something that is unusual, unheard of. No, they're lying about so many things. What makes you think they're going to act truthfully when it comes to actually respecting the integrity of the ballot? Don't you think that's true?
Whatever it takes to gain power, whether it's stealing, lying, cheating, killing, whatever it takes to take power and maintain power, the communists are going to do that. That's a Marxist philosophy. It's an atheistic philosophy. It came, the first big example that we maybe remember in recent history was the French Revolution. Robespierre and that whole bunch, the Jacobins. We know what happened there. And Karl Marx, studied the French Revolution, and that's how he devised the Communist Revolution. All you have to do is read a little pamphlet called the Communist Manifesto, and they lay out. I thought it was a big book. I thought it was, and I bought it a few years ago and read it. It's a little pamphlet, about 30, 40 pages long. It's the Communist Manifesto. It's been followed in every country that has been enslaved by the communists. They have a certain way of doing things. And that, of course, is destroy morals, destabilize the country, create a crisis, and then promise to normalize it if you'll give them power. So we get down to what they will do, this whole concept about voter fraud. And I've known about voter fraud ever since I've been in politics. I've known in certain ethnic communities, particularly in Houston, the black community, they had a way to vote everybody in their precinct with the same, the last 100 or 200 people will all be in the same handwriting. Ron Paul, who ran for president, ran for Congress in 1972 when I was in medical school. He ran against Bob Gamage. They documented the fact that he had been defrauded in the election. Election questions for Congress go before the U.S. Congress. Of course, Tip O'Neill was in charge. Guess what? They didn't uphold the charges that Ron Paul had leveled. Ultimately, he beat Gamage the following year. The rest is history for Ron Paul and what he's done. So we've known this is going on, but the Democrats have taken power in many metropolitan areas across the country, as you well, all across the country, New York and, major metropolitan areas, New York City, Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and in Texas, they control Dallas County. They control Harris County, where Houston is located, Bexar County, where San Antonio is located, Austin, where Travis County, where Austin is located, and many of the counties in the valley. What that means is the county clerk, the official of the election, controls the election. So let me remind you, folks, it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes. And what the Democrats have done here, I have recruited 20 private investigators in Harris County alone to do the background work and find out where the voter fraud is occurring. And let me just tell you, it's not shocking, but it may be shocking to you. But when I hear how they do it, I say, of course, this is how they do it. One, I know they're going to lie, steal, and cheat. We know that because there are informants within the Black community that are writing about this. They're upset about it because they've tried to get elected in primaries and they've had their elections stolen from them. And they're upset at the Dons, D-O-N, Dons, like a mafia Don, who are running the election. And in Harris County, it's a former state senator, former city council member, current county commissioner, Rodney Ellis, and Boris Miles, who's a state senator. They have two captains under them, Dallas Jones and Gerald Womack. We know this because of all the informants have told us. And here's how it works. Well, first, Dallas Jones, who's been a longtime voter harvester in Harris County and works with A.B. Canvassing, which has the dream team of people that get all these ballots by mail and simply fill them out for the people that they want, sign their names to them and turn them in. Dallas Jones has been hired by the Texas Biden campaign to run the Texas operation to export his illegal ballot by mail vote harvesting election fraud scheme across the metropolitan areas in Texas. And this is how it works. They work through nursing homes. They work through homeless centers. They work through the poor and poor neighborhoods. They work through students. They work at the polls because guess what? Now the county clerk gets to appoint all the election judges, and they're appointed as Democrats. And we have 120 voting locations for early voting in Harris County, which are run by the Democrats. 70 to 80% of all the early voting places are located in Democrat precincts, not the Republican precincts. And here's what they do. Here's one thing that they do. We have a police officer, 30-year police officer, assistant chief of a city in Harris County. There are multiple cities in Harris County because it's 60 by 40 miles. So we have a number of different cities throughout the county. He is assistant chief of one of the cities. He was a poll watcher, and he goes to the poll. He's a black police officer. He goes to the poll in an area where is primarily black voters, and the precinct chair, the election judge, is a black woman. And he notices now they allow drive-by voting. Our county clerk said, you can just drive in, turn on the radio, we'll sit in the car, we'll come out and let you vote. You don't have to come in. We've got a challenge before the Supreme Court today. They're deciding on that to shut that down, which it violates the Texas election code, but he's doing it anyway, which Democrats aren't hesitant to violate election codes. To stop them, you got to take them to court. They won't do it on their own. Unfortunately, our Republican officials have been, I don't know, asleep at the wheel, or they're acting like they're the 1918 Black Sox and trying to throw the election. But that's another story. So anyway, the police officer's there, and he sees the precinct chairwoman go out to the cars, and people will vote. And when there are multiple people in the cars, she will come back in with her computer, and she'll pick up driver's license off the desk, punch them in, and take the voting machine back out and let the other people vote. And he noticed this was happening several times over and over again. He goes to her and says, what are all these driver's licenses for? Well, some people out there hadn't got registered, or they didn't bring their driver's license, and so they want to vote, so we want them to vote. He said, well, that's fraud. You can't use somebody else's driver's license to vote, to let somebody vote. And so she took the driver's license and threw them in the trash can. He happened to get a picture of them. He signed an affidavit about what had happened. Now, this is a police officer with 30 years experience, and we had pictures. he got the information to our private investigators. We went to the district attorney of Harris County, which just so happens to be a Democrat whose campaign was supported with source money with $2 million through her campaign when she won 4 years ago. So I'm sorry, she won 2 years ago. So when she won that election, she was financed by George Soros. She's part of the Democrat machinery. And guess what? So we go down to file a complaint, ask them to press charges for election fraud, which would be, in this case, it would be a second-degree felony. So they go talk to the intake officers. They get pushed off to an attorney, and he goes, "We don't want to hear about it. We're not. See you later." So that's what's happening. So we got the information to the Texas Attorney General's office. They've sent down investigators to investigate. That's just one simple example. But the head of the elections, the county clerk appoints an election director. His name is Michael Wynn. He's there to enforce or to make sure that the ballot fraud takes place. And so what he is doing in a county like in our county, in any county in Texas, you can have poll watchers and you can have alternate election judges which have just as much authority as the election judge. And they're harassing them. They're throwing them out, not letting them view the ballots by mail at the main headquarters. So the Attorney General's Office of Texas is investigating that. We have affidavits on that, how they violated the law. Class A misdemeanor, a year in jail, $1,000 fine. We'd like them to take. I'm going to say we'd like them to take out Michael Wynn, and he should be. That's one thing. And let me just mention one last thing. The way they get their ballots by mail, you go to nursing homes, they have a contact there who's paid. This is what we get from the informants. The contact gives them a list of all the people living in the nursing home to the ballot harvesters, which is a second-degree felony in Texas. They fill out the forms. The ballot by mails are mailed to the nursing home. They get a call from the contact. The ballots are here. They go pick up the ballots. They fill them out. And they do that in the homeless centers. They do that to go door to door to the poor areas. They do that with students. So there's a tremendous amount of fraudulent voting. The head Don, Rodney Ellis, we're told through an informant, has said he can get 700,000 illegal ballots in Harris County, which would throw Texas into the blue column, and Biden would win. We have 38 electoral votes in Texas. That would be a 76-vote swing. It only takes 270 votes to win the presidency.
Well,
Harris County is ground zero.
How does the information that was there before we did the economic lockdown, and that, as far as I can tell, still seems to be there, but not in quite so great numbers, because it looked like Donald Trump was heading for a result in areas that would be just traditionally
Democrat,
delivering,
right,
90%, 95% of the vote to the Democrat. That he was cutting into that substantially. Have you seen an increase in this determined cheating so that they're pushing for numbers that could nullify that possibility and overwhelm it?
Well, yes, absolutely. They're doing that. You and I well know they've created what the communists do or the Marxists do is create a class struggle. So they've modified that to create race struggle. White against black, Mexican against black, Mexican against white. I mean, this is the whole struggle that they've tried to, that's what all this Antifa and Black Lives Matter is about. You've spoken eloquently about how those are Marxist organizations. We know that. Anybody that does any reading, all you got to do is read BLM's material, and the three founders of it are I don't know if they're card carrying, but they've said they're Marxists and they're communists. That's what they believe. So anyway, they're creating this stir in the ethnic communities, trying to create racial hatred, which is ridiculous. And we know this is being done because Trump, poll-wise, 8 or 10 months ago, had a dramatic increased number of support among the black community and among the Hispanic community. This voter fraud is not going on just in the black community, it's going on in the Hispanic community. They've got this all planned out. Let me tell you, so So yes, that's why they're focusing on this area. And what they do, listen, we even have identified. We have 20 investigators out, and they're following, they're surveilling, they're going to nursing homes, they're going to the homeless centers, they're going into the neighborhoods. They're even using this. We surveilled the office of Gerald Womack. Gerald Womack is one of the captains under Rodney Ellis and Boris Miles. We surveilled his office. As he came up, he drove slowly, looked in every car. He knows he's being watched. He doesn't know who's watching him. So he goes up, and then a van pulls up with 10 or 12 people in yellow vests that say census. They go up to his office. They come back down in 45 minutes. Then they're transported over to Boris Miles' office. It says census. And guess what they're doing now? And Trump, my understanding is called off the census door to door. They're going door to door now as census takers, asking people for their ballot by mail and voting it. Now, this is just totally egregious, but this is going on. I could give you one example after another of how this voter fraud is going on. And sir, I haven't even mentioned what's behind the screen, what's behind the curtain, and that is computer election fraud. We're also working with a cybersecurity company out of Dallas, Allied. They have looked at the audit logs of the 2018 general election, and the audit logs are everything that happens on a computer down at the main headquarters. 1,127 pages. They've evaluated every page with their experts who are former CIA, former NSA, and other cybersecurity experts. And they found that they would put every computer has a thumb drive. So you put the thumb drive in and you download it. And on the audit logs, they would download a precinct, and then the next entrance was delete. The next entrance was the same precinct with new votes. Anybody that had undervoted, in other words, hadn't voted in a race, they'd throw that to the Democrats. So we have affidavits to that, and this is being done by ESS. Most people don't realize that all the elections in the country, 92% of the elections in every county and state, are contracted out to privately owned computer election companies. And we have studied these companies, and they have vulnerabilities both internal and external. That means people can hack into these systems. There are three major ones in Texas: Dominion, ESS, and Hart. And these companies then roll their information up to Clarity, which is a national computer firm, which rolls up all the information to Seidel, which is out of Barcelona, Spain, which is the chairman and president of that company is Malik Brown, Lord Malik Brown, who is one of Soros's finance chairmen on one of his investment committees. So there's the Soros connection there. And so, I've heard for several years, Soros is getting into the computer election business. I thought, well, I don't know whether. Sure enough, our cybersecurity people have worked it all back, and yes, indeed, he has influence in that. And with his money, he can do whatever he wants. And what can happen? These computer programs, software programs, can be written in such a way that you cast a vote for candidate A. Guess what? It prints out you voted for candidate A, but it shifts to candidate B, even though your slip says you voted for candidate A. And that's how they end up. And they show that this was going on in Dallas. And we know the software programs are used throughout the country.
We're coming up on the need to take a little break here and let folks listen to a couple of messages. But while we're out, could you give a thought to a question that occurs to me as we're saying? Because I think that we usually think of people trying to steal the election outright. But what if they are also planning on just prolonging the agony so that other things might come into play? In addition to what we have to do in terms of trying to discourage or find out about the voter fraud, what are the mechanisms that allow us to keep them from forcing a hung jury, as it were, in places throughout the country? Just a thought to ponder, and we'll be right back. second week of November, I was privileged to participate in the Red Pill Conference in Mesquite, Nevada. It was sponsored by G.W. Griffin's group, and it brought together a whole array of activists and conservatives thinking through how we can wake people up to what's really going on in this country. There was a whole series of presentations that addressed political issues, issues of health, and other things that are being done to take away our understanding of what's really being done to transform this country into a totalitarian tyranny. If you understand the danger, then you'll want to be watching these DVDs. We're going to put them together in a series. I'll be introducing the different parts of the series, and they'll all be available at IAMtv.us, the exclusive distributors of this series of views of the Red Pill Conference. Welcome back. I am talking to my friend Steve Hotze, who is really concentrating on what's happening and what can be done to try to deal with and prevent election fraud in Texas. Now, part of the reason why I think it's important that we focus on Texas is that it's obviously one of the most important states in terms of the Electoral College and the voting, and it's a state that has in presidential elections during my lifetime been not totally but reasonably reliable as falling in the Republican column. That seems now to be up for grabs for a variety of reasons, but one of them has to be that a party that is now without integrity when it comes to governance, when it comes to the Constitution, that has adopted fully and wholesale the mentality of the Marxist-Leninist trained individual. And that mentality is win at any cost. The only truth is what the party desires, and the only outcome that is justified, not just, but justified, is what the party will accept. And so they're breaking, I think, down all possibilities to figure out how they can overcome the actual vote. Which right now, in the case of the Democrats, they were looking at the possible desertion of a significant enough number of black voters in their urban areas to lose the election without any trouble. For Trump to just, walk into his re-election without any trouble, because there were elements in the black community feeling quite satisfied with the fact that they had more available jobs, higher available income, and so forth and so on, than they had faced in decades. And this was having a good salutary effect on the president's prospects for re-election. What Steve is telling us about, I think, has to be listened to carefully, focused on, and we need to ask the question, and you may have a sense of this, Stephen, because you might be in touch with others. Are you in touch with other folks around the country as to what they're facing in terms of these kinds of fraudulent problems and what they're doing about it? And do you have a sense of how that problem is going vis-a-vis the outcome of the election? Is it becoming inevitable that these guys are going to be able to steal the election outright, or are they just going to be able to hold us up with enough hung jury situations around the country that they try to let the clock run us into what could turn out to be a very chaotic situation in terms of how the president is chosen?
Those are good questions. Yes, I've been in touch with people around the country. In fact, I have some people here today that are documenting nationwide the various problems with ballot by mail election fraud and computer election fraud. Here at the office, I'm meeting with them as soon as I get off this, and I met with them the last 3 days. And what they tell us is everything that we're experiencing here in Texas and Harris County is going on in the major metropolitan areas around the country that are controlled by the Democrats. And this is the way the Democrats operate. They commit voter election fraud. Now, how will you know whether or not there's voter election fraud going on in your state? Well, here in Texas, if all the votes are in Texas and Trump is ahead, but there are no votes in from Houston, or no votes in from Dallas, or no votes in from Bayer, you know they are working to steal the election, because they have to know how many votes they need to overcome So what could happen very easily is these states, and they will be, they're going to be inundated with these ballots by mail. I don't know how the other states operate, but in Texas, there's a panel. It's made up of half Republicans, half Democrats. And they look at the ballot by mail, and they have to verify the signature. Somebody has to come with a signature, and they verify it by looking at previous ballot by mail they have on computer. They compare the signatures. And they have to all agree that these are each ballot. Now there are 50 on the committee in Houston, Democrats, 50 Republicans. They have to agree that this ballot is acceptable. If there's a disagreement, it's put aside. So what can happen, of course, is inundated by these ballots by mail. In some states, you don't even have to apply. I know Colorado and other states, I think Oregon and maybe Washington, they sent ballot by mail to every registered voter. Now, you might say, well, that's fine. And shouldn't we have a big voting election? Historically, even in presidential years, presidential elections, only 50% of the electorate that's registered will even vote. Half the people that are eligible to be registered don't even get registered. So you got 50% of the population that registers, and in an election, only half of those people, that's 25% of people, will determine the outcome. That means 13% of the people working together can elect a candidate of all the adult population that could be registered to vote. So if you're sending out ballot by mail, guess what? That's a great environment and an opportunity to harvest literally millions of ballots. And they're going to be coming in, and they're going to be overwhelming the headquarters where they're counting votes. So in some states, like what happened in Pennsylvania, they said as long as they get it it arrives within 3 days of the election, they're going to count it. It may take a week to 2 weeks, and then there'll be challenges. So you can be sure that there will be challenges both from the Democrats and Republicans on results from the various counties, cities, and states around the country. And by the way, there is case law where you could sue in federal court, and the whole county's votes could be declared completely unconstitutional, and the federal government could come back in and run an election in that county again. That could easily happen in Harris County. That's why we're documenting every evidence of voter fraud in Harris County in the advent that Harris County exceeds the number of votes that it should have, and it's way out of balance. We can show how it has been fabricated, how it's been stolen, and we'll file a case in court, federal court, and ask the judge to overrule the election and call a new election in Harris County. This is going to happen all over the country. And so,
Can
yes.
you give me a sense from what you understand of how the different offices are likely to be affected by this kind of voter fraud? Is it usually something that goes on up and down the ballot? Is it something that goes on targeting the presidential race in a presidential year and things like that so as to save on effort? And I ask that question because it has a bearing, I think,
on the U.S. Senate.
How complex the situation is going to become.
Well, yes. In Texas, by the way, this is the first year there's no straight party ticketing. So you have to vote all the way down the ballot. And I can assure you, fraudulent ballots will vote all the way down the ballot. It's going to affect every race in Texas, particularly those swing districts. It's going to affect the U.S. Senate race with Senator John Cornyn against a woman who's an avowed lesbian who's running against him. It's going to affect congressional races across the state in those swing districts. So we know it happened in the past. We've documented it in the past. And this is going to end up in court. And yes, what is that going to create? It's going to create an uproar in the country. You saw how Antifa and BLM and that group of Marxists created riots and burnings and lootings and killings across the country. This will spread dramatically across the country, and it's going to create an uproar, I believe, and look, this is not we have got to believe that God's sovereign and that he can intervene in the affairs of men. Our founding fathers believed that. Any Christian believes that. If you pray, you believe there's a sovereign God who can intervene and answer your prayers, or else you wouldn't pray, right? So we believe that God can intercede in a special way, and we pray imprecatory prayers. We declare and prophesy against those that would create injustice. Voter ballot fraud is an injustice. God hates injustice. He loves justice. We're asking him to ensure that justice is done in this election, and that those people that participate in this activity would be exposed. They would be completely demoralized. They would be confused, that they would be troubled, that they would everything that they do, put their hand on, would fail, and that they would be not only exposed, but that they would be disrupted and stopped, that they would be charged, that they would be indicted and incarcerated. And that's what our prayer is, and asking God to intervene. Does that mean we don't do anything? No, we've got to do what we can do for our responsibility. You know, God's given us free will, and he's given us the opportunity to act. And so the old adage, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And we might say good men and women to do nothing. We have got to act. We've got to step up. And that means those of us that have the wherewithal, the know-how, and the ability to lead, we've got to provide leadership like you've been doing. We've got to be warning. We've got to have our people on the ground. We've got to be at the polls watching. We've got to have our investigators investigating. We need our officials, our government officials, the FBI. We've been in contact with the FBI. We've been in contact with the Harris County Police Department, with the Texas Attorney General's office, showing them what we have, asking them, and they've begun to surveil. Only God knows whether they'll take action or not. You know, the FBI, as you well know, at the upper levels compromised. So we talk to the people here, but to get permission to do what needs to be done, they have to go to the special, their special agent in charge, and then he has to get okayed by the Washington Bureau to
now
do
what. Do the parties themselves get involved in all of that? I mean, is the Republican Party, for instance, interested in and backing the effort that you're trying to make?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Alan West, who's chairman of the party, and Keith Nielsen, West is chairman of the state Republican Party, Colonel West, and Keith Nielsen's chairman of the Harris County Republican Party, have joined in various petitions for writ of mandamus, asking the Supreme Court to intervene to ensure that we have election. All we want is election integrity. Who doesn't? This isn't a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. Everybody should expect and want integrity in the election, and let the chips fall where they may. You know, if the Republicans were to lose in a fair election, then so be it. If the Democrats lose in a fair election, so be it. But to have the idea that the election can be stolen and have documented proof of this is of grave concern. And in some cases, the highest court in our state, the Texas Supreme Court, needs to act. We have got a suit we're filing tomorrow, asking we're suing the three companies that handle voter election fraud. That handle computer elections in Texas. That would be Dominion, ESS, and Hart. And we are suing them with a petition for writ of mandamus, asking that the Supreme Court would require them to follow the election code, which means they have to have audit logs when they finish the election. We have to be able to look at the audit logs to see what happened with computers. And right now, none of those companies they've said they're not going to supply audit logs. Well, that's a recipe for theft right there. Why wouldn't they want to supply the audit logs? So we have to go to court to force them to do that, and that suit will be filed tomorrow.
Well, with the precautionary steps that you're taking, though, does that cut down on the time that they'd be able to work these shenanigans if you've already put in place certain of the judgments that are necessary to make sure things can be handled properly?
Sure. If we get voter audit logs, that puts them on notice that they're going to be checked and fact-checked by independent third-party sources. And guess what? That is going to disrupt their operations, because it is a felony, second-degree felony, to do that, to cause voter fraud in the state of Texas. And what we're doing with the ballots by mail, having the FBI, the Texas Attorney General's office, the Houston Police Department, and all our investigators on the ground, 20 of them, guess what? That's already disrupted their operations. Over this past weekend, Dallas Jones, who is the Biden campaign manager, we have from reliable informed sources that he was picked up by the FBI and kept for 2 days in a hotel room and interrogated. And so we know that because we surveilled his home, and we know his car never left his home. The lights were off Saturday night. He didn't come back until Sunday night. He told everybody, well, I was in church on Sunday. This is ridiculous. He puts it on his Facebook. Well, we looked at the church service. He said he received an award. When they called his name, he didn't come forward. And then he said, I've been in Hartford. I've been in the Hamptons for 2 days. Why? He's the head of the Biden campaign. Why would he be going to the Hamptons on Saturday morning, come back Saturday night? So all these things, but we know from our inside informants, former FBI agents, that he was picked up. And that sends a dramatic signal to those that are involved in ballot harvesting that, hey, we better watch out. The feds are involved. We could end up.
I was going to raise a question that you're partly addressing the answer to, because it seems to me that these people without integrity create a devil in the deep blue sea situation in a way, right? Because in order to deal with them, you must let people know what is happening. You must take steps to try to deal with it.
Right.
But at the same time, if they are making this overwhelming effort to cheat, what do you say to people who are in a position where their kind of sense of purpose in going to in casting their vote and in making sure that it's cast is kind of pressured by the thought that, oh, what use is it? They're going to cheat us out of this outcome anyway. It seems to me that part of the reason I think it's important for people to hear what you've got to say is that they understand, if they didn't know it already, that right now it's of great importance that more people than ever who want to see an outcome that saves this country need to be voting by whatever means is going to be most effective for them. They should not be discouraged by the prospect of all this cheating from doing what needs to be done.
You're exactly right. Everybody absolutely needs to get out and vote. And we've just got to pray that God would intervene in a way that even when they try to steal the election, that they would fail miserably and that they would be publicly held accountable for this and ashamed about what they do. So you need to get your family, your friends, make sure everybody votes, all your staff members. I have a requirement on my staff. Part of our employment policy is you got to vote. Just keep your job here. You've got to vote. I don't tell them how to vote, but trust me, the people that are on my staff, all 70 of them, are here because they believe in the values that I espouse, or they wouldn't be here. I make it very well known what my values are before anybody comes on. And the people that are on the other side of the aisle, they don't want to work for me because I'm on the other side. So we have strong Christians, strong conservatives that work in our practice, and our guests at the Hotze Health and Wellness Center, 99% of them are people that say, thank you, way to go, keep it up, Doc, we appreciate your standing for our values. Now look, let me mention this. We're down to the lick log, folks. The future of the American constitutional republic depends upon the outcome of this election. If, God forbid, the Marxist Democrats win this election, they will control elections from now on. You only get to freely elect communists one time. After that, there's no more free elections. They're all rigged. And they have elections in other communist countries. Guess what? They're all rigged. They already have got the machinery. They got everything in place to make sure they win these elections. So it's imperative now that you act in any way possible to, one, vote, get your family and friends to vote, and then involve yourself by calling up your local party and asking if you can be a poll watcher, if you could be an alternate election judge. That's what you need to do. Support those organizations like our organization, Liberty Center for God and Country, Liberty Center for God and Country. We have a GoFundMe account. You can go to Liberty. You can go to Liberty Center for God and Country, or go to our website, libertycgc.com, and you can invest in our efforts. I'm raising money all the time. I don't primarily depend upon GoFundMe, although it's been helpful. I have to raise money by doing what you did in your campaign for president. You pick up the phone and you make phone calls and ask people to make an investment in the future of our country to save our American constitutional republic.
Well, I think if people really understand, because one thing you mentioned a little while back is that even when they get down to the wire in terms of the cheating that they're doing, they're still having to make a calculation.
Right.
And that calculation has to be warranted by some sense of what has gone before.
Exactly.
If there is an outstanding difference in the response of folks, I mean, I have been reading articles that say that there's unheard of enthusiasm for the Donald Trump effort now.
Right.
People have a fervor that is rarely seen, even when you get to this stage of the politics. I think that if it translates into a superior turnout, where people understand that if you have been sort of more nonchalant about voting up to now, this is one of those times when the fervor that people feel and the sense they have that this is their guy and this is important, and that whatever else may be true, they need to make sure that the country stays on track to avoid what is clearly a regime of deceit and tyranny and control, more or less for its own sake, filled otherwise with false promises, and a record, by the way, of total failure. When they get in control, the Marxist, Leninist, communist, socialist types get totally in control, they have never succeeded.
Right.
They have always failed. And where they claim, oh, Sweden, that's a... No, Sweden was never a totalitarian socialist country.
No,
never
it's not.
reached that point. And if it reaches that point, they'll go into the toilet. And you can see already from what's happened so far that they're pushing us toward the toilet. In the cities
Right.
that they govern, in the measures that they take, because that kind of control is no longer really about doing what's best for the public, what's best for the people. You're doing what's best for the little clique that wears the ideological identification tag and therefore gets the benefits, while they suppress in others the opportunity to succeed on your own, because that would challenge their power. Don't Americans, I sometimes think that Americans just don't get it. There's a reason these regimes fail. They fail studiously and with malice aforethought, because for everybody else to fail after the controllers have taken care of what they need is itself a mechanism of control. And I think a lot of people forget that.
Well, that's exactly right. We've seen that. We have seen this with videos of Cuba. You can go online, and there have been some people that have gone over and videotaped what Cuba's like right now under their communist regime. You can go to Venezuela. They can't even get toilet paper there. At least everybody, the COVID crisis, everybody's got plenty of toilet paper in America right now. Probably most people have enough to last them 6 months. I don't know why they went crazy about toilet paper, but they did. That was the primary item in the country. But in countries like Venezuela, they don't eat. The average weight loss is something like 20 pounds per person. People are fleeing the country, and the people that fled the country were the entrepreneurs. They moved to America. Why did they leave? Because they knew that the communist regime was going to destroy everything. And when the entrepreneurs, those people that make things happen and that create jobs, leave, and the communists are here, the communists aren't about creating jobs. They're about holding power and living on things.
Well, see, I think that is a decisive thought that people have to keep in their heads. When you make a choice, sometimes it's between individual and individual. Other times it has been in American history between party that stands for this and party that stands for that. Where we are right this minute is a choice between American survival as a government is constrained within constitutional limits, and individual responsibility and enterprise still has reasonably free play. Right? So people, if the government isn't making it for them, they can make it for themselves. But what we were just discussing is a simple fact. Commies don't want other people to succeed because the success they represent would then challenge the monopoly that the party has on power. That's why these regimes always fail when it comes to delivering for the general good of their people. The general good cannot be served when there's a monopoly party controlling everything, because their power is diminished when other people have the chance to succeed more than they do. They won't let it happen. We need to keep this in mind, ponder that reality, and then vote in the only way that allows the existence of the nation we have known to continue on any reasonable basis whatsoever. Think about that. That's the end of our segment right now. The Save America Marathon continues, however, after these messages. We'll be right back.